Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. We really, really appreciate it. And I know you've come a long way to be here, so thank you for that. As you know, we're talking about anti-epileptic drugs this afternoon. And on the whole, we call it Valproate. Is that all right with you? Yeah. And I want to say to you, Norman, I really do want to thank you and your colleagues, your parliamentary colleagues all on your group, for all the PQs, for the debates, for all the times that you've raised this really, really important issue. And we think that it is the work of the parliamentary groups that have really made this of such national importance, and I want to thank you for that. But we also recognise that it is also the patients' groups, and the patient groups have been at it a very long time.
Absolutely.
And it's really so good to see Janet Williams and Emma Murphy here this afternoon, and we know that you are the Secretariat for the all-party parliamentary group. And indeed, you've been talking globally, internationally, in this country, and raising all sorts of questions, and making it possible for us to meet affected people, and that's been very, very important to us. We actually think that it has been so critical that we should put patients at the heart of our review, and we have been trying to do that. And we want to pay tribute to the courage, to the physical, mental suffering sodium valproate has had on families, and the struggle that people are having just to get through life, and very much the worries about the future of themselves and mostly their children, now many grown up. So we've had some really heartbreaking stories, and they've had a huge impact on us. And we just want to pay tribute to the courage and the dignity of all those that we have met. So thinking about the hearing this afternoon, it's really your opportunity to tell us what you think we should know, what you think we should be focusing upon, and anything you wish to raise, comment on the evidence you may have seen on the website or heard, or your personal experience of individuals who've been so damaged by these medications. So this is your opportunity. And we are video recording these sessions, as I think you know, and I hope that's all right. They will be put onto our website. And so for the point of view of the website, for the screening that is going to be on it, if you could start just by saying who you are, so that we've got a record of that. So Norman, if you'd like to start.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for those introductory comments and your generous comments. And I would particularly endorse what you said about Janet and Emma and their extraordinary campaigning skills and their resilience in pursuing this so impressively. So I will say some introductory comments about what I think is, for me, the most important things that need to be confronted, but also then hand over to the real experts in Janet and Emma. So I think we always talk about this in a sense as two big issues. One is to stem the awful flow of new cases coming through by getting effective, robust procedures in place to stop more children being born with these problems and issues. And progress has been made, but we're still not there yet. And that remains a massive priority, and in a sense the number one priority, because to stop more children being born with these problems has to be the focus of everyone's attention. Second point is, this is obviously central to your work, is to learn from the experiences of this group, of the other two groups that you're looking at, to to find ways of establishing procedures for the future that can more effectively allow government to intervene quickly to stop these awful long-running sort of campaigns for justice that really take over people's lives. And impressive though Janet and Emma have been, they oughtn't to have needed to have done this. You know, we really need to find a more civilised way of identifying problems early and then getting to grips with them. So that has to be a central focus of your attention. But then thirdly, it's the need for justice for those people who have suffered as a result of this scandal. I think it's right to call it that. Now, it's not just the children who have been born. You hear so many stories of mothers in particular who've ended up feeling a sense of guilt. Misplaced, of course, because there is nothing for them that they should be guilty about, feel guilty about. But it's easy to say that, but it's much harder to escape from a sense of profound guilt that by taking medication you've ended up giving birth to a child who has issues, and the state has to confront that. And you know, there are the regulator, the governments, successive governments, and the manufacturer all have had a role to play in so many people suffering guilt because of what has happened to their family. And it ought not to have happened, and it could have been avoided had key players actually intervened as they should have done to prevent this scandal from happening in the first place. But then it's also the children, and you know, whether it's 20,000 or whatever the number is, the numbers of people affected by this, often in quite profound ways. And one of the things I think we've struggled with throughout all of this is that, you know, if you take thalidomide as another example of awful negligence and worse, in that case the outcome was so clear and obvious visually for people to see. Here it's not nearly so much, and yet developmental difficulties, autism, and all of the other impacts that this has had can have just as profound an effect on your life and on your whole family's life, because it affects siblings as well, and the parents, and ensuring that they get access to good and expert medical attention, but also recognising that there is a significant impact on their on the quality of their life and on their earning power as a result of what's happened to them, and that has to be reflected in what government does. Now, ultimately, I know that that's a decision for government, not for you, but in your advice to government, I hope very much that you reflect on the extent of the impact that this has had on individuals. So I think that's really what I wanted to say. So over to these two.
Oh, was it me? Janet Williams, I'm Secretariat for the APPG for Valproate. Earlier last week, I spoke to a lady in the office, I think it was Donna, who asked me for a brief rundown of the history of the APPG, and we've put that together for you here. I don't know whether you want to just give you a brief outline as to what the build-up of the
That'd be
APPG.
very helpful.
Yeah,
Thank
okay.
you.
Right, so I'll read it. And we've put together a little piece, and it just says, the APPG for Valproate was originally set up with the support of the thalidomide group and their chair in 2014, where we jointly became the APPG for harmful drugs. However, due to the chair being inundated by other groups, it was decided that in fact should set up its own APPG for Valproate so as not to dilute it, or the information of it and the work of the thalidomide. We had spent 12 months at that point with them learning how an APPG worked, and in July 2015 we set up our own with the support of Theresa Pearce MP as chair and named it Anti-Epileptic Drugs and Pregnancy. During Theresa's chairship we met with Health Minister Jeremy Hunt and Minister for Life Sciences George Freeman, and following we saw the beginning of the work towards the Valproate toolkit, which then was replaced by the Pregnancy Prevention Programme. In July 2016, Theresa had to step back from the APPG due to a shadow ministerial role, and it was suggested at that time that we approach Norman. Due to the INFACT had met with Norman previously when he was Minister, and during the coalition government. I mean, we were just delighted when Norman said yes.
Little did I realise what I was looking at.
That was in September 2016, and during his chairship the APPG has had a change in name, and it's October 2017 we were also able to arrange the backbench business debate for Valproate, which was a huge success, and we believe really sort of springboarded where we were at that point. And then obviously due to the change in legislation we had the Pregnancy Prevention Programme. So obviously together, the INFACT and the APPG, the members have all worked together to create the position that we're in now.
It's also worth noting that we had a minister who listened to us.
Yes, of course we did.
Yeah. In James.
Of course we did, yes. Well,
which was very significant.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Emma, do you want to add anything?
I'm Emma Murphy. I'm Managing Director of INFACT and I'm mum to 5 affected children. I just want to echo really everything that Norman has said. This is a man-made tragedy. We shouldn't really be here. And I do think we have to stress that, you know, governments like to say lessons have to be learned. We really do have to learn lessons because we're seeing the new influx of medications that we're all aware of. And there has to be tighter regulation. We're meeting organisations up and down the country who are agreeing with us that not enough is being done, and we're challenging it all the time, and the numbers are just not falling. And I think we've got to really work on that. I don't know how, but I think we've got to introduce tougher regulations and get real tough, because these are babies' lives that are. They're being born every day, and it's a national disgrace.
We did meet with the General Medical Council only yesterday.
Sorry, you met with?
We met with the General Medical Council yesterday.
Right.
Well,
and like we expressed to them, it's all right sitting, talking facts and figures and banding information around, but it's when you get down to the nitty-gritty of the real hardship that these families have gone through, when you talk about the problems that the children have got, problems that those problems have put onto the family and onto mum with epilepsy and all the stress, creating more seizures, more medication, all the rest of it, and how that progresses. And it's not until you actually make them aware of that situation and you bring them down to that point where they actually realise the problems that there are with this drug. Everything was light-hearted, talking about facts and figures until we sort of dropped that yesterday. And I think that's where all this should really begin from, like you say about, you know, what the families have gone through.
So you were instilling, presumably, the need for doctors to take much more of a personal responsibility for.
We've met some of these young people who've been affected. And one of the things that really struck us was the way that they were so concerned about their parents.
Of course.
And I thought that was really interesting, because I thought they would feel very internal about their own problems. No, they were thinking about their parents. And I thought that was very interesting. Norman, you've mentioned 3 different areas, organisations, whatever you'd like to call them, that had a part to play, the regulators, the government and the manufacturers. Is there anything further you'd like to tell us about those 3?
Well, I recognise that how one goes about approaching the subject is important. But I do think that the manufacturer is the only organisation in all of this that has made a substantial amount of money from this. And I think they have a responsibility, and I think they have to be confronted by that. I understand the need to address it in a sensitive way, but the bottom line is that they have known from the start that there were adverse consequences, and I don't think that they've done enough, bluntly, all the way through this. And I think the culpability rises as our level of knowledge increased, and they can always, of course, point to the fact that there is no legal decision against them in this country. But if we're talking about justice and morality, then I think that they have to be part of a solution to this. There has to be a settlement that ensures that families get financial assistance. In my view, there has to be some recognition of the financial consequences for families of this scandal, and the company should be playing their part in meeting that responsibility. Now, alongside that, the regulator, and all of my dealings with the regulator in the last 3 years have been constructive, and they've been willing to engage with us and to listen. But over the course of the period since the drug was first introduced, when was it, 1973? I don't think that the regulator has been in any way effective. And if you think about the regulator's role, it is presumably to protect patients from harm. It's a central purpose of the organisation, and they failed in that. And there has to be, I think, a recognition of that in the conclusions that you reach. And then, of course, there's government, and I obviously have my part to play in this because I was the minister who received a delegation, including Janet and Emma, and I knew nothing about this until that visit. But I was so horrified by what I heard, I instigated a process which I think in turn led to that European review of the prescribing arrangements. And then I was out of office, unceremoniously dumped in 2015, and so couldn't play any further part. But government throughout this period, since 1973, could have intervened and hasn't done, in the face of known harm. And it is an extraordinary story how it's gone on for so many years, but it has, and that has to be confronted because people have been harmed as a result.
Right, so
it is by my calculations, much of my information has come from you, 32 years from the time that it was known that sodium valproate caused congenital malformations to the introduction of a specific pregnancy prevention program. Why?
Well, it's extraordinary. There is no good explanation to that.
But you've just raised the question of responsibilities of regulators, government and manufacturers. But we've met a lot of people now, formally, and as I said to the last people we're talking to, the question I've asked many of them is why has it taken patient groups working with parliamentarians to bring this problem to the attention of the National Health Service or system and to my profession? So the question I'm seeking the answer to is those two questions. I need to know the answer because I'm not sure how the regulator, the government and the manufacturer can solve that problem. I think they could do more, but I'm not sure where the solution lies there or not.
So what I'm saying is that all of them could have acted and failed to act.
Yes.
I mean, if we're trying to establish the reasons why this scandal has happened, that has to be addressed. Their failure to act in the face of evidence.
Yes.
Now, there was a lack, perhaps, of good lobbying and effective lobbying until these two came along. But that's no justification for the failures of government regulator and manufacturer.
But it shouldn't take lobbying to do that.
Well, it shouldn't, absolutely. That's why the second of the three priorities that I described, in other words, establishing a mechanism that allows for a speedy assessment of a problem and resolution to it, is across the range of different medications and procedures, is so important. And that applies equally to the other two issues that you're looking at.
Do you think the patient voice is strong enough in the National Health Service?
Well, totally not. I'm looking also, I was the minister that established the Hillsborough-style review panel into deaths at Gosport Hospital. 456 people died, having been prescribed inappropriately opioids. Why were those families never listened to? All over the place you see examples of a bureaucratic system not listening to people. And it's quite shocking. I think it raises very profound questions about Bishop James Jones, who conducted the review at Gosport, talked about the patronising disposition of unaccountable power. That was what he called his report that he was commissioned by the Prime Minister to write about the lessons learned from Hillsborough. And I think that describes it perfectly. Ordinary people, because ultimately we're all ordinary people, being systematically ignored, not taken seriously. And we've got to find ways of ensuring that public bodies are more responsive to people than that.
Okay.
So how do you get the patient voice heard speedily? Because there are mistakes made frequently within the National Health Service, and some of them, are reasonable in terms that every operation carries a risk.
Of course.
Every medication carries a risk. And how do we identify those risks early enough? Because usually there's been a lot of deaths, as you were saying, at Gosport. We can't wait for those deaths.
Exactly.
So where is the mechanisms, where is the opportunity to actually identify things early enough?
Well, I think this is quite a big subject. I'm not at all sure that the Health Service Ombudsman is an effective enough system for reviewing or hearing concerns raised by people about things that have happened in the health system. And I do understand that you're dealing with often clinical judgments that sometimes go wrong, and that has to be accepted. But it's having some body that is able to assess where it's different from that, and where there needs to be a more thorough review without having to wait years for brilliant campaigners to emerge from the woodwork, as it were. And there's no mechanism to sort of systematically review evidence. And of course, I think it's becoming potentially easier with the digitalisation of data. We ought to be capable, in a way that perhaps we weren't able to be in the past, to identify trends and issues that may be of concern, and we ought to exploit that ability more effectively than we do now. You don't want to create a whole new bureaucracy, but there has to be some mechanism, some body that has the ability and the responsibility for quickly reviewing and identifying whether something needs thorough investigation.
And it also needs to have, as a predisposition, a desire to protect patients.
Yeah, and a willingness to listen to what people are saying to them without too readily dismissing them, which tends to be the culture in too much of the NHS.
Anything else?
Well, could I just go back to the first of the themes that you mentioned at the beginning around, I think you used the phrase stemming the flow of babies born with Valproate-related disorders. Obviously, we've got a pregnancy prevention programme in place at the moment, and I know the work that Janet and Emma have done and others have seen and heard about has shown that that's not necessarily working as effectively as everyone wanted to. Have you got any further comments you'd want to make on where we are today in terms of efforts being made to reduce that number of babies being affected?
Well, I think if the evidence is showing that it's not being effective, and Emma, you mentioned that the numbers are still stubbornly high, and inevitably this is a bit anecdotal because it's reports that people provide, then we have to look at what more needs to be done. We can't just say, well, we've taken action, let's make the best of it. That's not good enough. I remember when I met the specialist team in Norwich, and I think they've got a good team based at the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital, and they said that, I mean, this was 18 months, 2 years ago now, and they said that every patient in Norfolk goes through that team and they make the judgment. But they said to me that there's very few patients that need to be on Valproate, that in almost all cases, but not all, there is an alternative that is safer. The solution may be more restrictive ultimately, but I think we've got to look at how we can ensure that there is a specialist input in all cases to get it right, rather than misjudgments being made by GPs. Talking to GPs, I think the mindset has been, Valproate is they see it as the best. This is the most effective treatment for epilepsy, and their focus, understandably, has been on getting the best treatment for that person, but not enough focus on the awful consequences of that for the child. So I don't know whether you want to add anything about if the current process isn't working, what step do we have to take to ensure that every decision is based on evidence? And
I think at the moment, we've got to maybe think about doing a patient recall, like with what was done with smear tests. Patients were recalled in, and I think because it's not working as effectively now, I think we need to be thinking along those lines, because everyone is saying not enough is being done. Someone has got to tackle this, because like we all know, this just can't continue.
When we last met, we talked about the responsibilities of pharmacists, we talked about the responsibility of doctors, and you saw the General Medical Council yesterday. But the conversations, I recall, ended by saying, well, if all this isn't working, maybe the people we need to be really involving much more systematically are actually the women. And setting up a register, which we perhaps could do, because there are records everybody's taking Valproate, and contacting them directly, which would then be the basis of the recall. Has been suggested in relation to mesh. The difficulty there is finding the women, but here that shouldn't be an insuperable problem.
one question I wanted to perhaps ask, and I don't know how much you've analysed the data from across the country, but the impression I had was that it's quite variable, the rate of prescribing from one area to another. And what I imagine may be the case is whether that might depend on access to a good specialist team. And I remember in our earlier discussions with James, the need, talking about the need to ensure that the country is covered by a pyramid where there is always access to the right specialist team, rather than GPs doing their best but getting it wrong.
And that's one of the problems that we're finding at the moment, specifically in the area that I live in, because where I am, it covers 3 major areas, and there isn't a neurologist at the moment. Me and my son were both due for an appointment. We haven't seen a neurologist for going on for 2 years, and when I phoned and queried it, he'd retired and they haven't sent us a follow-up appointment. But I wasn't able to see a neurologist because they haven't replaced him, and they only had 3 epilepsy nurses covering this vast area in the northwest.
Yeah. And therein lies a significant part of the problem. You know, if the area is not well served, then bad decisions will result.
And then, of course, the huge manpower
Yeah, of course.
implications of getting more specialists.
Yeah. There are manpower implications, clearly, but it's also a question of organisation, of making sure that the system is properly organised with the sort of, you know, the pyramids of... you know, we have cancer networks that work effectively to ensure that everyone gets linked into the appropriate level of specialism. Does more need to be done here to ensure that...
we ought to be able to do it better than any other country in the world because of the nature of our national health service.
Of course, yeah.
Exactly.
Simon.
Well, I think we've been told by others that in the clinical world that they would expect and are seeing to an extent that prescribing of Valproate reduce. I think that regional variations is accepted by them, but overall prescribing levels, it is being said to us, should be declining. But if the number of babies being born with fetal Valproate spectrum disorder isn't declining, that runs somewhat counter to the prescribing volume reduction, doesn't it?
Well, when we first started this campaign, we met with the Minister for Life Sciences, and at that point we were told there was about somewhere between 31 and 27,000 prescriptions of Valproate to women of childbearing age every year. There was also around about 400 to 500 babies born to Valproate affected by it every year. We know at the moment that the figure for the prescriptions is around about 20 to 21,000.
So it's gone down by
It has gone down by about and the amount of children that are being harmed at the moment, which was talked about at an MHRA meeting that we went to only recently, and it was about 300. So it has, But even so,
still 20,000.
Still a lot.
This is the women of childbearing age, so this is the core group. There's still 20,000.
And 300 a year is
It's not coming down fast enough.
unacceptable.
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions?
No.
Can I just ask one thing? It was just going back, Norman, to what you were saying about the lessons learned, because of course the issue is you've been working so hard campaigning for Valproate and the impact on women of childbearing age. The new drugs that come along, are they learning the lessons? Is anyone picking up what should be being done for all of those drugs that may also be effective? And for women who are taking the new generation of anti-epileptics, do you feel confident that the lessons have been learned and the right policies are in place to prevent new cases?
I truly don't believe that they are, because we've broached this topic with MHRA and their response to about Keppra. I mean, Kepra's a fairly newish drug. We know it's causing some harm, but to have the response of we're not going to deal with that till we finish with Valproate,
It's not a good answer.
That is just appalling. These are the medicine regulators.
Yeah. There needs to be more transparent. They talk about transparency all the time. I hate the word, because there needs to be so much more of it. With all the newer drugs that are coming along, if that transparency was there, then these women would be getting the informed choice, or at least receiving that information as to whether then they wanted to proceed to have children or not. And with the newer drugs, that's still not getting through.
And they know about Pyramate, which is very similar to Valproate, and there's no action on that. They're not learning lessons.
Of course, we're just building up a new body of complainants,
Yeah.
which is dreadful.
I mean, is there an issue, because obviously one of the issues you're going to have is drugs aren't tested for teratogenicity pre-market, so there will be a period after they're marketed where there are going to be, they're going to be prescribed in pregnancy. If they are going to have a teratogenic effect, they will. But do you think it is that the lessons aren't being learnt quickly enough once that data comes in, or that the data isn't being gathered?
The data is being gathered through the UK Pregnancy Register. So the data is, granted it's the low percentage, but the data is being gathered by them. It's just not being worked upon as it could.
And we're not asking for these medications to be banned because we know that they are life-saving. All we are asking is that women are warned of the risk.
And get charged.
And it's not a big ask when you're thinking of children. It's not a big ask. And as regulators, you know, for patient safety, supposedly, but it's not happening.
The thing is with a neurologist, and talking about patient safety, the thing about neurologists in particular is, as far as patient safety is concerned, well, that's what they're doing. They're looking after that patient. They're not thinking about what's coming in 2, 3, 4 years' time, whether she's going to have children or not. That's not their issue. And I think
it sort of ought to be.
It's
not that big
of course it should. But I think that's another area as well that really needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, we covered our
Thank you very
time,
much.
I'm afraid.
Yeah, thank you.
I do want to thank you, all three of you, for the enormous amount of work you do. It is
We want to
so
thank you all as well.
impressive.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening to us.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.